Hey guys, what is up? Welcome into the Guilty as Charged podcast presented by the Blue Wire Podcast Network. My name is Steven. I am your host. Happy to be here today. Happy to be joined by my guys, Alex and Tyler. Tyler, we'll start with you, man. How you doing today?
I'm doing just fine. I'm glad we all got the memo to wear dark clothes in honor of the death of Michael Badgley's career.
Yes, which we will definitely talk about today for sure. Alex, how you doing today, man?
I'm really just heartbroken with the Badgley thing because I'm not going to get that P.F. Chang's gift card now. And the bet is null and void. Perhaps we need to have a Vizcaino bet now in terms of buying and selling, and maybe a Kessman bet. I don't know. Who knows who'll be the kicker? But it's a sad day for the welfare badger.
Welfare Badger. Yes, definitely a sad day for the Chargers kickers, which we'll get into. We're going to talk about the Chargers quote unquote unofficial depth chart as well. Really do a big update on training camp as a whole. And then we'll also talk about the Chargers and Rams preseason game. Our audio version today is going to start with an interview. However, I was able to chat it up with PFF Eric. That's Eric Eager is his name. One of the higher ups at Pro Football Focus. Had a great conversation with him. I did ask him about the Justin Herbert regression that they are talking about quite a bit. So had a great conversation with him. Very cool guy, very cool conversation. So enjoy that interview right now. As always, the video version is going to be separate, but the audio version is going to be happening right now. All right, so great conversation with Eric. Very happy that he was able to have that. I think it's a very curious conversation because right now everything is all positive vibes with Justin Herbert, and rightfully so. But he did kind of point out that there are certain things that Justin Herbert needs to improve upon, which I don't disagree with. And he simply pointed out that the best quarterback under pressure thing is probably not going to happen again. Obviously, the hope is that the pressures are less frequently happening with the new offensive line. But overall, I thought it was a great interview. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed it. Again, if you are watching this on YouTube, please go check it out. But yeah, very excited about that one.
Oh, you want me to talk about it? I didn't listen to it yet. All I do is export the video. So
you don't have to. I just felt like I was talking for a little bit too long, so I wanted to see if any of you guys had any comments there.
No, I'm interested in the regression sort of thing. Having watched about half the scrimmage so far again and watched every single play and gone through the depth and the who's doing what and who's going where. Joe Lombardi has done a very, very good job both simplifying things and making things easier for Justin Herbert, but also letting Justin Herbert do what he does best, whether it's bootlegs, play action, all these certain things. Things look really good so far is what I'm saying. And I'm excited. They got so many different players involved in that scrimmage with just the first team that, listen, could he regress in some areas? Sure. But I do think Herbert is going to have a good year just based on what I saw at that scrimmage.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just too early to say one way or the other. I'm not going to predict him to be the MVP. I'm not going to predict him to, regress and, have a Baker Mayfield kind of second year. But, I just have to see what this new offense was. Kind of like Arjun said when we talked to him in our episode about Justin Herbert regression, maybe if the Anthony Lynn coaching staff was still there, it would kind of be easier to predict one way or the other because he'd basically be playing in the same offense. But I don't know how, quickly or slowly Justin Herbert will pick up this new offense in addition to, everybody else around him. So that's kind of difficult. Plus the offensive line, right? Are they actually going to give up less pressure? I think so, but, it's a very health dependent offensive line, right? We already saw what it could look like without Bulaga for the brief time that we did. And we already saw with Lindsley for the brief time that he was out and for, a lot of the season last year when Bulaga was out. So, I'm not going to predict that he's going to regress or, progress in a way. I think I'm just sort of, with his 2020 stats for now. I also hate how people use the term regression because it's just become this word that means, well, this guy was good and now he'll be bad. And that's not what regression fucking means, you normies. But yeah, so that's just my thoughts on the whole regression debate. So really, it's just a big fat, we'll see.
Yeah, I think, it's obviously a little bit up in the air. I think he's going to improve more so than, regress. I think there are certain areas in which he will regress. Like he's not going to be the best quarterback under pressure again. Like that's just, even the best quarterbacks in the league fluctuate in that regard. So obviously the hope is that, the Chargers are able to kind of figure out a way to help him more in the intermediate range. And that's what we talked about with Eric. And, I know a lot of people hate Dan Orlovsky, but he and Mina Kimes had a great video on NFL Live the other day about areas in which Herbert can improve. And it's about helping him, learn how to take what the defense gives him and not always have to go for the kill shot, be able to check it down over the middle to Eckler for 6 yards, as opposed to trying to chuck it deep to Tyron Johnson, who's likely going to be double covered more often this year. So those are areas which I'm excited about to see that kind of Saints influence, because obviously, Drew Brees was not checking it deep all the time. So I think those are definitely areas that Herbert can improve upon. Keenan Allen, Josh Palmer, Jared Cook, those are players that will, and Austin Eckler, of course, those are players that will help drive his improvement in that area. So, all right, should we start with the depth chart first, or we want to talk about the scrimmage and the practices first?
We can start with the scrimmage.
Okay. So Tyler was obviously there. Tyler did a wonderful 24-minute video about everything that he saw. Had to leave it a little bit early, but that's okay. There was still a lot of great content there. So go check out that video if you haven't yet. Tyler, what was kind of your major takeaway or two from the scrimmage, attending it in person and kind of seeing things that we were not able to see?
I'm going to skip the kicker thing because that's just a whole mess, and you already know what that's about. So
yeah.
I will say that having rewatched about half that scrimmage so far with the first team, that Justin Jones was a lot more disruptive than he thought he was during the scrimmage. It's very hard to tell, and because they can't sack these guys live, it's hard to see exactly, if he would have finished the sack or not, but he was a lot more productive than I thought he was. And so watching him again, I was actually really, really impressed. The defensive front seven did a really, really good job overall. I thought they absolutely beat up either the offensive line or the running backs. Plenty of tackles for loss, plenty of run stops, plenty of pressures and sacks. And that's just the first team. I was really impressed with that. But then on the flip side, I just think this Chargers offensive, these skill position players are so good. And there's so many different pieces to use that, watching Herbert in these drives, I think where I'm at right now, he's like 9 for 10 for 93 yards or something like that. And it's just 4 yards to Cook, 5 yards to Eckler, 7 yards to Allen, 10 yards to Williams. It is so hard for the secondary to keep up with that many players. And every single time, other than one play that Herbert is just like, I don't even think he would have completed it anyway. But he's been almost perfect. Just finding the right player, the right matchup, the right hole in the defense, whatever it is. So I was really, really impressed with that. So defensive front seven looks great. Secondary doesn't look bad at all. I just think that Lombardi, Herbert, and the offense did such a good job finding those little pieces here and there. I will say Asante Samuel Jr. on rewatch was getting picked on just a little bit. I missed the play where Guyton had that huge catch. I believe it was on Asante Samuel Jr. Unfortunately, the play before that, Kenneth Murray got hurt. So I was busy trying to figure out what that was. I wasn't recording it or anything, so I don't know exactly what happened. But, there was one play where Mike Williams just ran like an out route in the end zone. And he was wide open for whatever reason. If you're trying to bracket two guys like a triangle, you have Derwin James and Asante Samuel Jr. Then you have Mike Williams in the middle. For whatever reason, Samuel Jr. just kind of came like over here to help out on the inside and then just let Mike Williams just run to the outside. So, I'm not saying it was a bad day. And clearly in training camp, he's going against Keenan Allen. He's getting plenty of good reps, and there were good reps in that scrimmage. But, just something to keep an eye on. These guys are human.
Yeah, I mean, from what Tyler presented, he sort of had a tweet that it felt like kind of summarized things up, where it was like, well, the kicking and the offensive line were kind of what we saw last year in some regards. The offensive line is still taking time to gel together. I do think ultimately, of course, it will be better. But Corey Linsley out, of course, from the rest of that scrimmage as a precautionary measure. Plus, the rest of the guys just kind of seemingly not having it and letting the defensive line have their way. I don't think that's a bad thing. I just think that's something that's going to happen at this stage. It's hard to not talk about the kickers for me. I know Tyler already summed that up in his video, but it just kind of has me feeling hopeless. Like, I know I predicted the most optimistic record prediction out of all of us at 11-6, and I think this could be, at the very least, a 9-8 kind of team. But the variance that someone like Robert Mays talked about, like this kicking situation is almost all about that. Like on some level, you could have a team that's supposed to have 12 wins be an 8 or 9 win team just because of some missed kicks or just special team situations that don't go your way. And the fact that I really just can't have confidence in any kicker. Badgley, missing and getting booed, which I thought was pretty funny. By the way, I support booing kickers. That's going to be my thing that I stand on. So it's just really tough because Badgley just looks hopeless, really, from 40 plus. And Tyler also had to tweet that he had a kickoff that didn't make it to the 5-yard line or barely made it there.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So he can't do kickoff duty and he can't kick past 40 yards, which means it's really the same Badgley that we saw last year. So that's going to be the disappointing thing. I do think Badgley is kind of done at this point in the kicking competition. I don't want to write him off too fast, but plus, his effort today, going 3 for 5, missing 2 field goals, that's not great. And the other thing that just kind of stinks is I wanted Badgley to get pushed ultimately out, but I don't really have that much faith in Tristan Vizcaino. I know he hit 5 for 5 today, but he just missed a field goal from under 40 yards during the scrimmage, which is, inexcusable. It's a chip shot field goal. I say that I don't kick field goals, but you have one job and go do it. Badgley's had half a job because he doesn't even do kickoffs. So, and Kessman unfortunately does go 2 for 6. So I think he's sort of out of it, but it's really going to be Kessman or Vizcaino or Kessman at this point. I think Badgley is out. And the thing that stinks about it is just I don't really have confidence in either because they've played in a combined 1 NFL game together. Being Vizcaino's 1 game in San Francisco where he relieved for Robbie Gould. So it's just such a heartbreaking thing because I think this can be an 11 or 12 win team that's ultimately going to get knocked down to 8 or 9 wins because this kicking situation costs them unless Vizcaino really turns the corner or something happens. But I just don't have the confidence at this point.
Yeah, I'm fairly confident in saying that the Chargers return and coverage units will definitely be improved. And that is a big part of, DVOA and expected play, point per play kind of thing. That's going to improve. And I was kind of looking at some numbers yesterday, and Nasir Adderley was 7th in the league in yards per kick return attempt, which is really exciting that he's still going to be able to do that. I think he's a really good kick returner, but the kicking situation is really weird. The kind of overhaul that the Chargers are going through in terms of special teams, you would have thought that they would have brought in, some veteran presences, right? And it's all just we drafted, Nick Niemann because in part of his special teams ability, and Larry Roundtree, and because of his special teams ability, and we signed Ryan Smith, which apparently that's not going well either, which we can talk about on the depth chart. But I was just always surprised that they didn't bring in a veteran kicker to push Badgley. Zane Gonzalez just got signed with the Detroit Lions, and he maybe is only slightly better than Michael Badgley, but that he's a veteran presence, and you can still bring in Vizcaino and Gonzalez still. So I just don't feel great about the kicking situation either at this point. Mostly put Vizcaino's season as my name today as a joke because he went 5 for 5 on the same day that Badgley went 3 for 5. So we'll see, man. At this point, I think it's going to be Vizcaino. Alex Kessman is getting the fewest reps, and he had the worst performance of the scrimmage. And, you kind of know what Badgley is at this point. He's the known commodity. So I feel like it's going to be Vizcaino, but I don't feel great about it. It definitely is worrisome. And then after the scrimmage, I went and looked at available kickers, and it's Roberto Aguayo and Dan Bailey, and it's just not great. So it's unfortunate that the Chargers are probably going to have a kicking problem again, considering everything that they've done this season has been about getting smarter and upgrading the schemes, and for whatever reason they just were good with the kicking situation as is. So obviously hoping for the best. Vizcaino has some very intriguing traits as a strong leg kicker, but like Alex said, he missed a gimme field goal attempt in a scrimmage with a stadium that was half empty. So definitely worrisome on the kicker front.
Oh, I also just want to say, people were saying that, oh, don't boo Badgley, all this, don't boo the players. Badgley was missing kicks in empty stadiums last year. So I just wanted to get that out on the table. And yeah, so that goes for all the kickers who are in this position. They're in this position for a reason.
Okay, so how do teams that end up with good kickers get those good kickers? Like, is it all draft? Is it just luck? Is it, how do they?
If it's kind of, a needle in the haystack kind of experience. Like, kickers are so hard to predict from year to year. Like, Roberto Aguayo is arguably one of the best college kickers that we've ever seen, and the Buccaneers drafted him, and he was trash. And you look at Younghoe Koo, who was awful with the Chargers and absolutely deserved to be cut. Like, I'm sick of this revisionist history of like, we should have kept Younghoe Koo. No. He was awful. Like, he deserved to be cut. Like, let's move past that. And then, of course, he becomes, this amazing kicker with the Falcons. So a lot of it is luck of the draw. I think one of the things that I really like about the way that the Ravens do business is that every single year they bring in competition in some kind of way for Justin Tucker. And Justin Tucker is arguably the best kicker in the league right now. And every single year they bring in a priority undrafted free agent. They bring in a veteran, like whatever they want to do. They always have competition for Justin Tucker. And I think you have to give yourself as many shot attempts as you possibly can. And it just doesn't feel like the Chargers have done that historically. I know they have 3 kickers on the roster this year. I just don't feel great about any of the 3 of them. So a lot of that is luck. A lot of that is, attacking things the smart way. And it just doesn't really feel like the Chargers have been able to do that.
Cool, and I sort of, I just have one more thing to say regarding the kicker stuff, because I think you bring up an interesting point is like, how do you get a kicker, right? Do you just go through the draft and do that, or do you go through undrafted free agency? I think just bringing a competition is a good point, because like, I get where the whole like spend a 5th round pick or trade for a kicker, I get where that comes from. But like also you can end up with a Justin Rohrwasser situation with the Patriots just as easily as you can end up with like an Evan McPherson if he pans out. So to me, I think you just bring competition, hope for the best. That's what they didn't do with Badgley the last 2 years really prior to this one. So I hope that's the case going forward. But as far as like drafting a kicker or trading for one, I think that's a bit extreme.
Yeah, I'm never into the idea of drafting a kicker. Like, the odds of you drafting that kicker and that guy becoming a great player, like it's just, slimmer to none than usually. Like, would I rather have, Chris Rumph or a kicker? I'm going to take Chris Rumph. Would I rather have Larry Roundtree or a kicker? I'm going to take Larry Roundtree. So I understand, like, some people are like, well, you get the best kicker in that class. And it's like, well, really, what's the difference, right? Because, I mean, I forget his name. Rodrigo Blankenship was drafted, and that was fine. But then you have guys like Roberto Aguayo who get drafted, and it just doesn't work out. So it's just.
I believe Blankenship was actually undrafted.
Oh, Blankenship was undrafted. Okay, I thought he was drafted. That's my mistake.
Yeah, he was undrafted with the Colts. Justin Tucker was undrafted. And, the crazy Nazi kicker that was on the Patriots, he was the drafted one. So, sometimes it's just funny to think about that. And people overthink the draft all the time. And you never really know how these guys are going to transition into the NFL. So that's just the challenging thing in terms of a true evaluation on something that's such a small sample size in terms of like plays.
Yeah. I don't know. So we'll have to see. We'll move on to other takeaways. And I think I've seen a lot of people kind of be, like worried about the offensive line or like worried about the secondary after Sunday's performance. And I'm just not to that point right now. I think when you're in a team setting like this and you're in training camp and you're in scrimmages, like nobody knows the Chargers defense and their secondary, better than the Chargers coaching staff. So like it stands to reason that they know like how to exploit all the weaknesses. And it's the same thing goes for the defense and the offensive line. I've seen some people be like, man, Oday Abuji's like really getting worked. Like, oh, like he's not very good. And it's like, well, not all 5 starters along the offensive line are going to be great players, you guys. Like, that's just not how it works unless you're the Saints or like teams like that who have, spent decades, revamping their offensive line. So this is the first year of the offensive line. I think they will be better than they were last year. Hard not to be. But, the reality is that it's not going to be an elite unit from day one, which I think not everybody's kind of expecting that. But I've seen some people say like, oh, it's going to be a top 10 unit. It's going to be a top 8 unit. It's like, I don't think so. Like, we need to pump the brakes a little bit here. Tom Telesco kind of talked about it's going to be, a couple year process of revamping this unit to the point where they think it needs to be. And I'm very excited about Rashawn Slater. I think he's going to be a very, very good player in this league. But it stands to reason that like he could struggle a little bit as a rookie. Like, we need to be okay with this offensive line not being the best offensive line in the league right away. Like, it's going to take a little bit for them to gel. It's going to take a little bit for the offensive coaching staff to figure out what works for them. Matt Filer said they've got a lot of run packages of kind of every scheme: gap, power, zone, outside zone, inside zone. Everybody's got to try and figure out what works and what doesn't. And they've only been practicing in pads for like 2 weeks. So like, let's pump the brakes a little bit in terms of worrying about the offensive line, worrying about the secondary. There's a lot of moving parts that still have to come together and should throughout the season.
I would say, pump the brakes and just chill out with the offensive line. I know it was kind of hard to watch, and I know I did say that the offensive line gave up like 10 sacks potentially as a whole, which is obviously not good, although most of that did come against like the second and third team units. Like Chris Rumph feeding up Harper isn't like, it's not big on my radar or anything. And the guys that did really well were the guys that have been there before that we kind of expect to be good. Balaga looked pretty good. He pancaked Bosa on one play. Lindsley looked really good in the time that he was in. Filer looked really good. Abuji, not as established as like a long-term starter. He struggled, and Rashawn Slater had some struggles too. So, but I think those guys will eventually come along, at least Slater. And listen, 3 out of 5 ain't bad. I don't remember the last time the Chargers had 3 solid players out of 5. And I expect it to be better than that. But at least 3 out of 5 is pretty solid to me. And, again, the defense they're throwing so much at them. It's very hard. Like, they almost block everything perfectly on outside zone. Everybody gets their blocks, no problem. But the linebackers are just fast and they move. And you have Derwin James running guys down. It's just very hard to run on this team and pass protect too. There's just so much that they do. I saw Drew Tranquil on a blitz this scrimmage. There's just so much that they're going to throw at them. So, Washington football team, that'll be tough. But come like the Dallas Cowboys game, I think, in a few games moving forward, they'll be able to kind of find their rhythm.
Yeah, so I think the thing is, it's just about having, one guy out of 5. Like, if if Ode Bushi is that guy that's struggling, I'm not too concerned at this point for the entirety of the offensive line. The problem wasn't necessarily having, Forrest Lamp last year. It was having Forrest Lamp, in between Sam Tevi and Dan Feeney, right? And then, that's really where the chaos begins. If you have him in between Corey Lindsley and Rashawn Slater, I don't think that's great, but that works better, right? Relatively speaking, on the offensive line. And, I don't think they mean for him to be a long-term starter anyway. Like, they gave him a 1-year, practically speaking, minimum deal. And they're just like, all right, well, we'll see what works. You can make the argument maybe they should have drafted one higher in terms of a guard, maybe that can compete this year, because I don't think Jaimes is really going to compete for either spot on the inside this year. But I'm not too concerned with Abuji, considering the guys that he's really on the line with. And like Steven said, my expectation was never that this was going to be a top 10 offensive line. I think if it's at least top 20 to 25, like, that is such a drastic night and improvement, right? Like, if you're at 21 instead of 32, like, that may still seem like shit, but it is still a huge improvement from where they were last year in terms of being the worst, right? And then that also goes back to the Herbert regression thing, where if you're just getting less pressures and not more, that helps in terms of the whole, EPA per play debate.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, in terms of expectations for the offensive line, I think if they're hovering right around 20, and kind of like the pass block win rate, run block win rate, like, that's great. Mm-hmm. And then next year you'll get a year 2 leap from Slater. and hopefully you'll be able to find a long-term guy at right guard and right tackle, kind of depending on how things go. But and what happens with Filer and Brendan Hymas, who are kind of tackle guard hybrids. But that's another reason why I think kind of next year is the big push year, because next year, if there's an interior offensive lineman that's worthy of throwing the bag at them, like say Brandon Scherf actually becomes available, then you can go and do that. So we'll have to kind of see. I do want to shift towards the skill players because we talked a little bit about Jason Moore previously. He made some good plays on Sunday at the scrimmage. He was working with the first team offense yesterday because Josh Palmer was out with personal reasons, so he is back. Also, Corey Lindsley is back at practice, if you haven't heard. Kenneth Murray is not, so that's something to monitor as well. Brandon Faison is still gone as well. So just a quick nugget there. But Jason Moore's making some plays. He's taking advantage of his opportunities, it seems like. And it makes the battle for wide receiver 5-6 a little more interesting. If he is able to kind of go out there and really be kind of the guy in the preseason games, which kind of depends on who plays and stuff like that. But it's important to talk about that Jason Moore is making plays. He's coming together, seemingly earning the trust of all the quarterbacks. They all kind of have a good relationship with him. So Tyler, what do you see from kind of the back end of the receivers from this scrimmage, including Jason Moore?
I mean, first I got to start. I know I don't want to take anything from Moore, but I do have to start with Austin Proehl, who had like 5 catches, would have had 6. What am I supposed to say? Like, the guy keeps getting targets, the guy keeps catching everything. But Moore is an interesting one, and I kind of wish that he were an option on punt return or special teams or something, because I think he's a better receiver than Proehl. He's just a more dynamic receiver than Proehl. Proehl is a solid, slot, short yard gain, bubble screen, whatever you want him to do, sort of thing, just kind of near the line of scrimmage guy. But Moore is an actual, no offense to Proehl, wide receiver looking kind of guy. I don't remember who did I say that was a less useful Jason Moore. I felt really bad about that now, because now Moore's out here killing it.
Scott.
Sorry, Scott. Moore's apparently 6'3", 215, and if not for Proehl hogging so much but attention because he's been on special teams, I think Moore has actually been one of the other better receivers at camp, and he is absolutely deserving of that spot. And I don't know what happened with Mike Williams today. Does anybody know?
No.
Mike Badgley speaking to the media right now. That's hilarious.
Just like Badgley in front of the media. What a horrendous! Yeah. Oh my, poor guy.
Prayers for that guy.
But I haven't seen any updates on Mike Williams. So this coaching staff has been very cautious with players. So I'm hopeful that is the case. I mean, I feel like if he were a little more seriously injured, we would have seen like, oh, he's talking to trainers, like, oh, he left practice. Yeah. So he still stayed at practice today. He just wasn't participating. So I'm hoping that's just kind of like a vet day off kind of thing.
Sure. The other thing about figuring out this, we can talk about the depth chart at some point too. They're definitely keeping 4 tight ends. Like, after that scrimmage, I am very positive to keeping 4 tight ends. So, unfortunately, there is no extra like wide receiver 7 spot for Moore or something like that. Yeah. So it's going to be a heck of a battle. I don't know. We'll see come preseason, because they are both, like, I would say almost equally, if not, very slightly close to each other in terms of targets. And it's going to be a battle in terms of, do you want the better receiver, or do you want the guy who can do a little bit more overall? I don't know. It's going to be a really close one.
I think it's interesting, and I think they're still playing around with things and experimenting, right? Because Guyton was out last week, and Proehl was sort of the first man up in that regard. And now you had Palmer out, right? So then Moore is the next man to step up. So I think they're just kind of also experimenting along with this competition, just seeing kind of what works, what doesn't. As far as who has a leg up, I don't really know. I would say that it's Proehl, but Moore can kind of make some of those plays. But Moore will be buried on the depth chart as the wide receiver 6. So you may want to go with the guy that does have that special teams upside, like Austin Proehl. I think in a lot of ways that provides you a little bit more value. But yeah, as far as the battle, I think it's still very much in the early stages. And it could probably be any one of the 3 of Proehl, Moore, or maybe KJ Hill if he, still starts to get a little bit more in terms of reps. But yeah, the one takeaway just from all of this, I think, is firmly that Joe Reed seems to be on the outside looking in. And that's kind of disappointing considering he was one of the first picks of day 3.
I will say he was kind of a little bit more involved in the scrimmage. I didn't record any of the second or third team units, but Joe Reed was actually more involved in the scrimmage than I would have guessed.
Yeah, I just don't know how Reed makes the roster at this point because I mean Moore is rotating in with the first team offense. You know, KJ Hill and Austin Proehl are really the two guys battling for the punt returner and even kick returner spots. So I just, you know, Joe Reed wasn't even listed on the unofficial depth chart as a kick returner. Like he's just not there. So I will say this, you know, Daniel Popper, he wrote about his takeaways yesterday. So I wanted to share a couple from practice. The first one that I want to share, he says the Chargers opened up team drills with 3rd down 7-on-7s. Justin Herbert's best throw of his series came on a deep over route to Jason Moore near the right sideline. Herbert weighted the ball beautifully, throwing over a leaping Alohi Gilman for a 1st down completion. He said Moore, meanwhile, has come on over the past week, and he even caught 3 passes in Sunday's scrimmage and is pushing for a 53-man roster spot. So definitely something to keep an eye on there. He also wrote about KJ Hill catching 2 passes yesterday, including an outstanding catch on a crosser near the right sideline on a throw from Chase Daniel. Hill is a polished route runner and has shown off impressive hands and body control this camp. And then he says the wide receiver battle is the most heated of any position on the roster. Tyron Johnson, Jalen Guyton, Josh Palmer, KJ Hill, and Jason Moore are all making plays. And then, like we just said, he said former 5th-round pick Joe Reed has dropped behind those 4. So those are the guys that have to feel that, you know, they've got to make some tough decisions. And I think it's an interesting exercise in terms of roster building because I'm pretty sure that KJ Hill and one of it, KJ Hill or Proehl, are going to make the roster, like I said, as a return man. But then are you looking at Jason Moore as kind of like a more physical guy, or you keep Jalen Guyton as that speed guy? So it is interesting. I do expect Jalen Guyton to make the roster. But it's going to be interesting to see if they do choose Jason Moore over one of those other guys. I mean, it's because they value his size and his route running ability as opposed to Jalen Guyton or Tyron Johnson's ability to stretch the field a little bit.
I'm curious how they would use I wish I could see the scrimmage with Tyron Johnson because Jalen Guyton was involved in a lot, and he was involved in a lot of plays that you don't like, not the receiving end of the play, but he was involved in opening up that play as well on a lot of different things. He's very involved. I would get into it in another breakdown, but a very specific concept that they've run a bunch of times so far involves Jalen Guyton a lot. So I do think, unless they think Tyron Johnson can just replace him outright, and I suppose he could, I do think Guyton is pretty safe so far.
Yeah, I think Guyton is safe. To me, it's just a wide receiver 6 battle at this point. I don't think 2 out of the 3 of those guys make it, which, we can talk about when we get to the depth chart kind of stuff. But yeah, for me at this point, it would have to be Proehl or Hill. Moore, I think Moore is interesting, but I would go with those 2 guys, or one of those 2 guys, because of their special teams value.
Yeah. All right, guys. Any other major takeaways from practices the last couple of days in the scrimmage before we dive into that unofficial depth chart?
This kind of ties in. I was actually surprised to see that once Murray was off the field, that Ogbongbemiga was right in there. And I don't know. It seemed like between Kelly and Roundtree and then Ogbongbemiga and Neiman that they had the plan of first half, you get to go. Second half, you get to go. I don't know if that means anything, but Ogbongbemiga got that first crack for that first half, if you will. Although obviously they didn't anticipate Murray would go down. But Ogbongbemiga got that full crack in that first half. Second half, it was all Neiman. I don't know if that matters that Ogbongbemiga was first, because technically Neiman was drafted. So in terms of priority, supposedly based on how they're doing it, he should go first. But yeah, he was the first one out there. And, there was some struggles for sure. Like coverage is not his thing, but he's fluid. He looks good against the run. And I think there's something there. And I predicted he wouldn't make the roster, but we'll see. They seem to really like him. And then with Mark Webb going down, DeLuca was out there a lot. He is just now safety 4, and he got a lot of action. He almost picked off Easton Stick. I mean, who didn't at the scrimmage apparently? But yeah, I mean, there's a shot for him to make the roster too. Some guys are hurt and these guys step up, boom, you make the roster. So I went from no undrafted free agents making the roster to we'll see, depending on injuries.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty succinct takeaway. just when it comes to all these guys going down and health, that's just going to change the roster more than anything, right? With Ryan Smith's injury and obviously Kenneth Murray will make the roster, but if Kenneth Murray is a more long-term injury, I guess we'll see kind of what that ends up being because he didn't practice today. But that'll be interesting to see in terms of how many linebackers they may want to keep.
Yeah, I think linebacker 5 is definitely the spot that I'm kind of flip-flopping the most frequently on. Because, like the first week was like, oh, Cole Christiansen's in with the second team. He's calling plays. He's working with the first team special teams unit. And then this week, Ogbongbemiga is the one to step in for Murray instead of just pivoting right to Tranquil and White, which I thought was super interesting, which we'll talk about in a second. But all right, let's dive into this Chargers unofficial depth chart. I know there was a little bit of confusion from in terms of like how the Chargers were setting it up. And let me make sure I get this. Okay, sorry about that.
That's like that cool funhouse mirror.
How do I get it? I want this. I don't want this one. I want the.
Just go back to what it was. It looked fine.
Okay. How do I get? Oh, whatever. This is live TV at its finest.
I just want to say that in general, I'll just talk while you're doing that. I don't really care for this depth chart, and I think it's wrong. I think this unofficial depth chart is unofficial for a reason.
All right. Well, let me try and. I don't know why it's not letting me share the Chargers screen. Maybe I have to do a separate window, I guess. Let's try that now. Sorry, guys. I should have figured this out beforehand.
It's all good. If anybody wants to guess how they use Jalen Guyton, a particular play, throw it in the comments. It was definitely done at training camp, and it was definitely done a couple of times in this scrimmage. There we go.
Okay, that looks good.
All right. So first things first, I know there was a little bit of confusion in terms of like how the one that was tweeted was kind of formatted. So the one on the Chargers website is this one that I'm sharing. It's a little more clear. You see Keenan Allen, first team receiver, Jalen Guyton second, KJ Hill third, and then fourth team, Joshua Palmer, Austin Proehl, John Hurst, which is kind of what we were all saying on Twitter. It's like it just seems like they were kind of choosing veterans over young guys at almost every chance that they could get. So like Josh Palmer as a fourth team receiver, that is absolutely false. That's not been what the reps have shown us. But guys, anything else stand out to you here in terms of, we'll get to the defense first, but in terms of offense, what do you guys see that stands out to you here?
Well, if you count Neighbors as a tight end, which obviously they don't, but he lined up at slot receiver a couple of times in the scrimmage. So it's amazing that 5 tight ends could make this roster, and they all were involved on first team, which is crazy to me. Trey McKitty was involved, Anderson was involved, Palm was involved, Cook's obviously involved, and Neighbors was involved. It's crazy that they're going to have 5 tight ends that legitimately will all mix in and be active on game day and mix in.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have too many takeaways. A lot of this is just the chalk that we would have predicted, right? Like if you look at running backs somewhere here, right? It's just Eckler, then Jackson, then Kelly, then Roundtree, then Bradwell, right? So that's really just kind of what it is. And it's what it is heading into camp, right? I don't think any of us really believe Josh Palmer is like the wide receiver 7 in terms of like how it fills out. He will eventually be at least wide receiver 4 or 5, I think. But, this is just kind of how it works. The, vets are placed over the rookies in terms of, kind of the precedent there. And, I just think it's kind of before the competition start. I'm not going to go as far as Tyler and say, like, this is just a bunch of, bullcrap. Like, I do think they are giving you.
I'm the heel now.
Cool. Right. I think they are giving you what it was heading into training camp. What it will be 3 weeks from now. I think at least, 15 or 20% of it probably will be different.
Yeah, I think there are certainly some things that you take as stock, and there are other things that you don't. Like, this tab of receivers. First of all, I wish that they would include a separate tab here for like 3 receivers and then 3 corners, because that's like the most commonly used personnel packages right there. Is the 3 receiver set on offense and then 3 defensive backs on the secondary. So I wish that they had that in there, as opposed to like putting, Asante Samuel Jr. as Chris Harris's backup, and putting Jalen Guyton as a backup. Like, I just wish that they would have that in there so you could see like who's the starter. The other thing that kind of stands out to me, I guess, in terms of the offensive depth chart, is the offensive line, that backup unit.
Yeah.
Ryan Hunter kind of being there still is what it is. Like, we've seen Brandon Hymas kind of work it in there more often. And then Nate Gilliam really has only been working as that third team center or second team center when Lindsley has been out. So he was initially brought on as an undrafted free agent as a guard, but it seems like they've kind of transitioned him to center a little bit. And then Kyle Spalding is the one from San Diego State. He's kind of flipping back and forth between left guard and right tackle, it seems like, with that 13 unit. So just kind of wanted to point those two out there.
I don't understand why Hymas is listed at a right guard when he's been playing left guard.
I know.
Tyree St. Louis is the right guard when he's being left guard. So again, I hate this list. But Hymas is second team for sure. I wasn't sure if at the beginning of the week if that was just like, okay, they're trying him out, but scrimmage time, he was second team easily with Tyree St. Louis. So he's the backup left guard.
Right.
Yeah, and I fully expect him to make the roster. I know some people after the first week were like, "Oh, like what's up with Hymas?" And it's like, he's gonna make the roster. Like, they drafted him this year. Like, they're not gonna cut that kind of offensive lineman. And if you look at like this whole third unit, it's all undrafted free agents, and then Hymas, which is kind of annoying. But Hymas is gonna make the roster.
Yes, he is. It's like a Scott Questenberry situation. You'll have him around, see if he starts.
Yeah. All right, let's jump to the defensive side of the ball. I think the biggest standout for me in terms of looking at the depth chart is I really like how they put Drew Tranquill and Kaiser White as co-starters as opposed to making one of them the backups. I think that really speaks volumes to how they view both of those players. And Ronaldo Hill yesterday, I loved how he talked about Kaiser White. He apparently they call Kaiser White the bully because he's able to kind of really be a bully in the box and bully people on reps. Has a great competitive attitude in competition, that in the competitions that happen on a daily basis. So more glowing reviews for Kaiser White, and I love that they put him and Tranquill as co-starters as opposed to listing one of them as a backup.
This linebacker group is athletic, man. Murray, like, of your starters, Kaiser White's like your least athletic guy, and then behind him you have Nick Niemann, who would kill the athletic testing. Then Eamon Ogbongbemiga is explosive as hell. It's a really, really fast, explosive group, and they've come along really, really well so far. But it is cool to see Tranquill and White split like that. And when Ogbongbemiga came in, like, they kind of just threw him in there, but then they pulled him, and it was a lot of Tranquill and White kind of the rest of the way for that first group. So I wouldn't say like Ogbongbemiga's like cemented in there, like over White or Tranquill or anything. It just seems like they just tried it out, but then they wanted more of that Tranquill White situation.
I think it'll be interesting to see in the preseason game, who kind of plays more, right? Like Tyler mentioned that they kind of split, Niemann and Ogbongbemiga once, Kenneth Murray went down. So that'll be a thing to watch in terms of like how many quarters does each play, how many reps do they have. I feel bad for poor Damon Lloyd because I don't think that we've ever talked about him. And that speaks to his chances of making the roster. But yeah, so I just think it'll be interesting to see how much each one of them plays in that first preseason game, and also, of course, what they do with their actual reps.
Yeah, Damon Lloyd's that linebacker who was in that spring league, right?
I think so.
I don't even think we've like heard anything about him or like Willie Yarberry. Like, I just like, I wish I knew more about you guys, but I don't. But the other thing too, in terms of like co-starters, like Emeka Egbule and Chris Rumph being right there as like co-backups is really interesting. I think Kyler Fackrell is really going to be like a borderline starter in terms of snaps. So really, like, we haven't seen Fackrell work with the second team defense all that much. It's been Egbule and Rumph as opposed to, them being like just Uchenna Nwosu's backup. So that's obviously something that's got to sort out. We kind of talked about Egbule the other day. Chris Rumph did have the 3 sacks in the scrimmage. But like Tyler said, 2 of them were against Darius Harper, which I think Harper's an intriguing practice squad kind of guy, but good for Rumford doing his best and taking care of business, but don't really know how notable that is.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm curious how it'll play out in the regular season or even the preseason. Joey Bosa wasn't on the field a whole lot. There's no way in hell that's not, that stays true come week 1, but it was a lot of Fackrell and Mosu during the scrimmage. So I don't know how much, like I was just kind of always thought that, Fackrell and Mosu kind of rotate, but it seems like to keep them fresh, they're just doing a solid, almost even rotation. And Bosa actually, I think he's played less in the scrimmage than the other two guys. Again, that's obviously not going to stay that way, but they do have a plan to keep this guy healthy for sure.
Yeah. And then in terms of the defensive line, what did you see from Fehoko and Broughton? Because I know that those two have kind of been going back and forth, and it's been a really good battle to watch and to listen to what's been going on.
Yeah,
I know Fehoko had a couple plays. I think he had like a sack or something like that. I know Broughton had like a batted pass. So, what did you see on Sunday from those two?
Yeah, I didn't record any of the second or third team units, so I can't go back and watch these guys. Fehoko, I didn't hear his name brought up all that much, although he's more involved in that kind of run stuffing, two gapper kind of take on two offensive players kind of guy. So I didn't really get to see him do a whole lot. Broughton didn't come up a couple of times, had that pass batted. I believe he had a really good pressure somewhere in there too, possibly a sack. I think Dan Wolkenstein posted a sack or a would-be sack. So this defensive line is really heating up. And again, another reason I don't want to keep Easton Stick. Like everyone on this defensive line, some of the linebackers, some of the defensive backs, they're just somewhere more valuable and so much more impactful that I'd rather keep Cortez Broughton than Easton Stick because he's just another rotating guy, another weapon you can use. So I can't take a whole lot away from what I saw because I just didn't pay as much attention and it was hard to just think of everybody in my head all at once. But no, they've both been making plays in camp and it's a really good rotation behind the starters for sure. I'm impressed with the starting group of Justin Jones and Jerry Tillery, but we'll see how it goes moving forward. I don't know who they're going to keep. Like, I don't think anybody gained any ground. I don't think Broughton or Fehoko gained ground on the other. I think it's pretty much as is, and I still think they're keeping Fehoko.
Yeah, I mean, I think they'll either keep both of them, keep one of them, and stash the other on the practice squad. I suppose that's a possibility, too, just in terms of depth and addressing that. But it'll be interesting to see how it plays out because I think you have Justin Jones, Jerry Tillery, and Linval Joseph very clearly as the starters. Does Christian Covington kind of being more of that kind of big, massive, not that he's a stopgap per se, but being in that middle as a tackle, does that make you maybe lean towards a Broughton instead of a Fehoko just in terms of versatility? Perhaps it does. I don't know. That's kind of where I would lean, but I don't feel strongly about either guy at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. Just for really quickly, Gilbert Manzano just tweeted about Michael Badgley being booed at SoFi Stadium, and Badgley said, quote, "They have expectations just like I do. You don't like hearing it, but it's a part of the game," end quote. So
it's a very good answer.
Yeah,
that's a very good answer. And I like that Michael Badgley is pro booing himself. That shows character development. That shows skill. And Michael Badgley, you are a resident Philadelphian.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. All right, well, let's talk about this secondary depth chart because it is getting a little bit more interesting because Brandon Faison has been gone. Ryan Smith has barely played. I think he practiced the first 2 days and that was it. So Ryan Smith has a core injury, according to Daniel Popper, and Faison is still dealing with a family issue. Hope everything is okay. But Ronaldo Hill yesterday said that they went back and watched the film, and they said that Tavon Campbell, I can't remember which is the correct way to say that. Either way, Mr. Campbell is apparently popping in practice, has made some good plays, and is really taking advantage of his reps, right? Because Faison and Smith theoretically would be getting more reps than him if they were both on the field. So that's another guy similar to Jason Moore who is kind of taking advantage of his opportunities and potentially working his way, into maybe even the second unit. Again, if you have the slot cornerback listed, I think he would be kind of a backup there as opposed to being behind Brandon Faison here.
A little surprised in a good way, by how much they're playing him on the outside during either scrimmage or in practices now. But hey, I'm all for it. The guy can play both, and that's wonderful. Chris Harris Jr. is technically your starting outside corner right now, but he goes inside. Asante Samuel Jr. inside outside. So have a guy like Campbell that can do that, great. And I believe I had him making the roster most recently. But to see him even take further steps and kind of establish himself a little bit more, hey, that's great. And he's a guy that picked 6th Joe Flacco, I believe, which that's nothing to write home about a ton. But hey, you got some experience, you have some instincts, you put something on film for these coaches. So I do think he'll make the roster. And, as far as Ryan Smith goes, I believe he had a pretty decent start to training camp. Like, I think he made some plays, but I don't know what to expect from a core muscle injury. I don't know how long he's going to be out for, but for right now, like, there are so many other guys you can find to contribute on special teams, I think. And it's not like Ryan Smith was like an amazing contributor for the Buccaneers. He had like 7 tackles. And again, there's more to it than that, but he's not like a shoe-in. If they signed Cordarrelle Patterson, for example, and he were kind of hurt, he would still make the roster. Whereas Ryan Smith has just that role and not really offering a ton at corner more than like Campbell or even Faison. Like, I'm a little bit worried about him making the roster, but he did get signed, so that does hint that he has a better shot than most. But I mean, if he can't stay healthy and if he's not out there by preseason week 2, then move on, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting with Ryan Smith. I'm curious just how specific do they see his special teams role? Is it something to the point where you don't know if anyone else can fill in terms of, his special teams ace role at the end of the Buccaneers? Or like the Buccaneers, can you kind of replace him and figure out ways around it, right? So I think that'll be important in determining whether he makes the roster or not, and hopefully he does start practicing soon so we can actually see something on tape instead of just going, well, he was injured for 2 weeks and we cut him, right? So I actually do want to see something from him before we kind of make that decision, for sure. I got a little OCD about this chart when I first saw it because it's like, well, Brandon Faison kind of is the CB2 and Michael Davis is the CB1, but like in reality, it kind of doesn't matter as much, right? With how much these guys are going to move around, and Chris Harris is going to play some safety. Asante Samuel Jr. will move around and maybe take Faison's role at some point. But yeah, I think unlike the traditional Bradley defense that we had, like just how much these guys move around and how much each of them will play and be an important factor, it kind of makes it feel less important, like where they are in the depth chart and just, will they be available? Because I think you are really looking at the 6 corners that'll be there. There have been kind of some moments from Dante Vaughn. I think Kaman Hall had a small moment maybe at training camp. But other than that, it's, KJ Sales and John Brannon. I don't think either of those guys are really going to crack it. Shout out to Jaleel and his agent really getting KJ in there as his cousin, for those that don't know. But I do think it's interesting just how these guys are placed. But like Tyler said, I think this is one of those moments on the depth chart where it doesn't really matter, and we'll kind of see how they actually all play on the field together, because it is something that's so radically different than kind of the next man up cornerback mentality of, say, Gus Bradley.
Yeah. As it pertains to KJ Sales, like, I had like 4 or 5 South Florida people be like, man, you guys got to steal. Like, I was like, did this guy really do that much in South Florida? I literally had never heard of him until they signed him. So maybe we'll have to look into that. But I also did notice, I was going through all the pictures that the Chargers put up online after the scrimmage, and Sales actually came out of the tunnel with the other return men, as opposed to coming with the other secondary members. So maybe there's something there in terms of, returnability. I don't know. We'll have to see. I guess my question is that, with Ryan Smith, if they cut Ryan Smith, which defensive back makes the roster then? Because, Ben DeLucas had some good moments, apparently, in absence of Mark Webb. Dante Vaughn's kind of rotating a little bit. John Brannon has had some pass breakups. Keeman Hall has had some pass breakups. So it seems like all those kind of guys are right on like even footing. So I don't know if either of you guys have kind of a way you'd be leaning there, but it's just gonna be interesting to see, like, if Ryan Smith doesn't stay healthy and they cut him, which defensive back do they pick instead of him?
Alex, you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, I can go first. To me, at this point, I really don't have a preference.
Ooh.
I'll have to see if they play in the preseason. Honestly, between Ben DeLuca, Vaughn, Sales, Hall, Brannon, all those guys, you could even make the argument and say, what if we keep five cornerbacks instead, and maybe add another linebacker, add another pass rusher, right? I don't know if it's as simple as we just take out Ryan Smith and we're instantly adding another defensive back, because you may be able to get another guy maybe in the linebacker group or somebody else who can contribute on special teams. But for now, at the moment, it's a little too buried down the depth chart for me to care. And I also haven't seen any of these guys play actually at training camp, being on the other side of the country. So I know Tyler's about to go on a whole Ben DeLuca propaganda tirade right now. But yeah.
All right. Well, you take all the logical, boring approach and make things sense. I'm going to add a fifth safety for no reason. I'm going to add Ben DeLuca. Okay. I kind of was pushing for him. I'd like to be right. I don't think I will be right about Ben DeLuca. But he is backup safety number 3. And backup safety number 3 has been playing quite a bit lately, especially with Mark Webb out. And who knows how long Mark Webb's going to be out for. If Ben DeLuca crushes it in preseason as that backup set of safeties, with the backup set of safeties, he has a shot. But all right, fine. Yes, I think Alex is right. And I do think that if they keep 5 corners, they'll keep 4 safeties. If they cut Ryan Smith, I do think that gives them an opportunity to keep someone like a Cortez Broughton or, hey, another Jason Moore or something like that. Or, if they have to, and I kind of think they should potentially keep both the backup tackles, both Pipkins and Norton. So if you have to pick between one of the two, and it's either Ryan Smith or Storm Norton, an injured Ryan Smith or Storm Norton, I'm keeping Storm Norton. So, I think Alex is right, but I would like to see DeLuca stick on the roster, and I think he has a chance to.
Yeah, I guess my thinking is that we've kind of just assumed that they're going to keep 10 defensive backs from the start, and maybe that they would kind of prefer to hold that. That's another thing that's going to be interesting. Apparently, Vic Fangio has always kept 11 defensive backs since he's been with the Bears and with the Broncos. So I don't think that's going to be the case. I'd be pretty surprised if they kept 11 defensive backs. But that's just something that I think is interesting, because I'm a football nerd, and I think disciple versus teacher and their tendencies is an interesting conversation.
I will say that the only time I saw Sales was he was pumping up the crowd before the practice or the scrimmage, and then I saw him draw a pass interference play. So not draw one, but that was interference.
Yeah. All right. Anything that you guys want to talk about on the special teams depth chart?
Nope. Throw it away. Lachlan Edwards had a shit punt, and that's all I can say. Ty Long sticking around.
Yeah. Alex, anything? Alex, you're on mute, I think.
Cute. Great. I've seen a lot of people go at Ty Long on Twitter and be like, oh, he was a bad punter last year, but he was actually top 10 in air yards, and also he had Joshua Kelly blocking for him. I think we got to take it a little bit easier on Ty Long. I think he is the starting punter and deserves to be. We'll see what Lachlan Edwards can do, but for now, I really don't see any reason to not have Ty Long as the punter. I was happy to see Nasir Adderley as the kick returner. I think that kind of is the right decision, given how he ended the season. And it wasn't a particularly small sample size either. He did it over 5-6 games, right? So there was something to that with Nasir Adderley as the kick returner. So I'm curious to see what that brings. Of course, I think KJ Hill and Austin Proehl could also do that role fine. But yeah, the kicker thing to me really doesn't make any difference at this point, because I'm pretty sure that's just their way of saying Badgley was the starting kicker coming into camp based off of him being the starting kicker last year. Vizcaino and Kessman, of course, will compete behind him. I do think it's kind of interesting that they pretty much left Badgley off of kickoff duty entirely, despite the fact that Swinton obviously saying, hey, that's very important for us. So, him not being there at all, even as the 4th guy or something like that, that's certainly something to think about in terms of what his actual chances to make the roster are, which I'm pretty sure we're all down on after today. But to me, more so than the missed kicks, more so than all that, it's just I do really think that they want a guy who can also kick off as well. It doesn't seem like Badgley's capable of that based on what people saw at the scrimmage and really what we've been seeing the last 3 years, unfortunately. So those are really my only takeaways. Kicker competition wide open in the air. I don't make anything really of their depth chart from that standpoint, but was nice to see Nasir Adderley in there.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to see what Adderley does, full time as a kickoff returner. He only had, I think, like 13 attempts, and he returned 11 of them, which was kind of an unreal kind of success rate, if you want to call it that. But I'm excited to see what he does as a return man, because he really only had like 5 or 6 games at the end of the season. As for Badgley, like Brandon Staley kind of said after the scrimmage, like, oh, we let Badgley go first because he's been, he's the most experienced kicker, like he's been with the team. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of another way of saying, like, until we know otherwise, like Badgley is our kicker. We all are kind of assuming it's not based off of what we're hearing, but the other guys have to go out and do it. Like they have to go out and take it from him. They're not just going to hand Vizcaino the kicking job. So yeah, not a whole lot to take away from the special teams depth chart.
It's Vizcaino for the whole rest of the way. I'm pretty sure at this point he's got it.
All right. Also, I'm pretty sure it's Vizcaino, and people keep correcting you on that. So I don't know if that's actually
Matt Money Smith said Vizcaino during the play-by-play. They were saying Vizcaino. Okay. So I was like, I guess it's Vizcaino.
Maybe everybody else is wrong. So I'll correct the way that I say it, and I'll start saying Vizcaino from now on.
Yeah, I just when I first saw that, my Spanish brain just went right to Vizcaino, because that's how you would say it in Spanish. But anyways, so that's just my brain. All right, let's quickly talk about the Chargers-Rams preseason game. Obviously, none of us really know who's going to play and how much they're going to play. Brandon Staley obviously is not going to tell us all that, except for like he's not playing and he is playing. But he kind of alluded to it and said basically if they still feel like they need to evaluate the player, that they're going to play. So someone like Josh Palmer, Asante Samuel Jr., all these young guys, like they will be playing, which is exciting. I think Justin Herbert maybe sees like a drive or two, but I'm not expecting like Brian Bulaga, Linval Joseph, Joey Bosa, Keenan Allen. Like I don't think any of like the older veterans are going to play. But it is going to be exciting to see. Like I think, the Rams have basically said like no starters are playing. So that's kind of why I feel like getting Justin Herbert in there and having like a drive or two against backups, like it'll be good. Like get him some rhythm, like get him some confidence, and really kind of just have a seamless drive or two, and then hand it off to Chase Daniel after that.
I'm looking forward to what everyone else is looking forward to, and that is the running back 4 battle that's going on right now. It's a fierce competition. I just got to see these guys with the pads on actually try like running people over, because if you just count the numbers from the scrimmage or from practice, they get like 3 yards and that's it. But there's something to momentum,
breaking
and drive and breaking the tackle and all that that you just don't get in those scenarios. So now can Larry Roundtree, that's one of his best attributes, and almost the same for Joshua Kelly. Can they get those extra yards? And that's what I'm most looking forward to, because Roundtree needs to gain some ground, man, because he might be RB5 behind Bradwell, who again was the punchline of Hard Knocks last season, and he's behind that guy right now. So I'd love to see him get some momentum and show why he was picked by the Chargers.
Yeah.
I mean, despite me wanting to say I was right, I really do want to see more development from Roundtree. I'm close to declaring myself right, but I actually do want to see if he has something, because they do have a free agent situation with Justin Jackson next year, and do have to figure out some of those problems. So I am curious about the RB4 battle. For me, it's less about position battles and more just about like what percentage kind of the plays are. Arjun mentioned this in his analytics video, but really like how much are they running base? How much are they running nickel and dime? Tyler can speak to this from some of the scrimmage, but I haven't been able to see any of the scrimmages or training camp or practice in any of that. So I'm really curious to see just what the ratio is in terms of all of the kind of particularly defensive sets that they're going to be running.
They ran a ton of 4 DBs. Like they were pretty much, 3-4-4 the whole rest of the way during the scrimmage. I don't know if that's because of any injuries or whatever, but it was pretty much 3-4-4 the whole way.
Yeah, and that could just be them trying to get comfortable in the base packages.
Yeah,
Brandon Staley with the Rams last year was in there. They were in their base package like 15% of the time last year, and that's kind of been where the NFL as a whole is trending, right? Because you have so many teams are in 11 personnel with 3 receivers on the field like at all times. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on. But I'm just excited to see them like play full contact football, like be able to take players to the ground. I think this is a big game, and obviously the whole preseason is big for everybody, right? But specifically for like running backs and linebackers, I think this is where we'll see the separation. This is where we'll see Nick Niemann versus Cole Christiansen, or Nick Niemann versus Eamon Ogbongbemiga, Larry Roundtree versus Bradwell versus Kelly. This is where we'll see like some real clarity for the first time, because I feel like in terms of receivers and corners, like we're able to get like a broader grasp of their skill sets through 7-on-7, through team drills, like who's getting targets, who's getting all this stuff. But in terms of like linebackers and running backs, like this is where we'll see some real separation from those groups.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm so bumming about Niemann right now. Like I really want to see this guy do well. I think when the game's on the line, he'll do pretty well. So I'm really looking forward to him. Although it's very interesting the way they rotated them. It was Christiansen and then one of the 2 other guys. Christiansen was just kind of the other backup linebacker, and they're rotating Ogbongbemiga and Niemann next to him. So I don't know. I can't wait to just have. Look, my seats are great, but I have to sit there and I'm recording the thing, and they're a billion yards away. And now we finally, even though we don't get all 22, we do get the preseason game recap. And finally, we can rewatch some plays and have some clarity on what happened.
Yeah, and you don't have to film this game, so you can be all in, take the binoculars, you have a good time, not worry about having to film every single play. So that'll be exciting for sure. Alex is not going to be there with us after we record our recap. The moving week has officially come for Alex, so very exciting news for him. Arjun is going to be joining Tyler and I for that recap, however, so really excited to get back with Arjun. And Alex, man, like obviously wish you some safe travels to your new home and for the next couple of years.
Yeah, I'll be there. I'm not gonna call myself out for that podcast yet, because I still could be on it. I'll call myself.
Belichick on us here.
Yeah, when Belichick does the whole questionable thing with Brady, I may be there, but I may not. So, but yeah, thanks to everyone for the well wishes that I've seen in the comments and everything. It means a lot. So yeah, I'm excited to start down there. But yeah, no, Arjun can definitely take my place and probably care more about the game if I'm unavailable. So.
Oh man, you're gonna pull Mike Florio and say preseason doesn't matter?
No, preseason does matter, but with everything else going on in my life, it matters a little less than it usually would. So yeah, Mike Florio gets paid to do football stuff a lot more than we do. So it's a little worse for him not to care.
Unfortunately. Yeah, we got some rough days from the national media. We got Mike Florio saying preseason football doesn't matter. Got Skip Bayless talking about Mike McCarthy's weight. So rough week for national media.
Yeah, I dare Skip Bayless to like go on TV and just say like, "Oh, I wouldn't want Andy Reid as my coach because he's fat. He's one of the greatest offensive coaches of all time, better than any Cowboys coach probably ever." So yeah, I really like Skip to take that take, but what an asshole.
Yes. And then like this is football. Like a third of the coaches are fat. Like what are we doing here? I can say that because I am fat, so it is what it is. All right, Tyler, any final thoughts before we wrap up today, man?
No, I was gonna pull another comment from last week, but it's not worth it. Alex, learn some Morse code, so if you're being held hostage in that foreign country, you can just blink a couple times and let us know.
Okay.
There we go. All right, guys, thanks for tuning in. As always, make sure and leave us some comments, like the videos, leave us some ratings or reviews on your audio platforms. That's going to do it for us today. So excited that Chargers football is officially back. We can talk about actual football events happening after this weekend. So very exciting news. Hope anyone that is attending the game has a wonderful time. And we will see you guys next time.